Well, hello and welcome to the show. Today I am joined by Mr. Stuart Fraser. Stuart runs a private mortgage fund as his day job, but he has also felt the call to public service and has actually got himself up to have a go at the Senate, if I understand correctly. Stu, thank you for making time for me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Scott, thank you very much for having me on.
Mate, it's good fun. And I attended an event recently at Phil DeBella's nice little spot there, Coffee Commune. And I've known you for a while now, but you shared a story there about some of your journey to become somebody silly enough to want to put their hand up and throw themselves out there for that sort of stuff. And I went, that's really quite amazing. Because in all these years, I sort of hadn't... I generally wonder why somebody would put themselves out there for public scrutiny, which is what I see most of the time when, that public office. It's something that I sort of really struggle with. I mean, I think it's a lot. But you've, I guess, felt that you really needed to answer that call.
I did. I think there comes a point when you see something that you can't keep walking past. And what it is for me is looking at our future. And as a country, and as a state particularly, there was a time that we made things happen. We were a country of opportunity, and government played a major role in that. If you look at the development of this country after World War II, and particularly Queensland, we looked at our natural resources. And we said, okay, what have we got here? What can we do with it? We didn't just mine ore and bauxite. We refined it and we smelted it. We opened rail lines. We opened power stations. We looked at our amazing islands and we developed a tourism and an airline industry that employed many Queenslanders, and it was ecologically sensitive, given where it was in the Great Barrier Reef. But we made industries. I think we've moved a long way from that today. And that's what concerns me is going into the future. And what I want to see is government creating opportunities for Queenslanders. I see government today putting obstacles in the way, not creating opportunities. And I know many people who have a new idea, and they have to line up their finances and their stakeholders and their supporters. And they go to government wondering what obstacle will be put in their way, not thinking about the opportunities that government could create for them. It's how are they going to put an obstacle in my way which will stop me from developing this great idea. And I really want to be involved in reclaiming that mindset of a country that rolls its sleeves up and gets things done. And I want to reclaim that, not just for my family, my wife and my daughters, but for all Australian families.
And I've got to tell you, this is, I guess, part of my frustration, because these are things that I never thought about as a younger man. But running my own business for a couple of decades, raising a family, child in school, you just start looking around at stuff and going, it's a bit weird, because, I've had my head down for a long time. And when you stop and look up and look at these things, you sort of go, hang on, that's a bit weird. And, most of my great breakthroughs in life have been when I've gone, oh, that's a bit weird. And then you go and investigate further and you're like, oh, okay. That's suboptimal at best. I guess what I'm really interested in, Stu, is nobody wakes up and sort of goes, do you know what, this is it, I'm going to do this. I'm super interested in going back in time. Little Stu. Where were you born?
So I was born in Charleville in Western Queensland.
There you go, boy from the bush.
Oh, definitely. And raised on a sheep and cattle property on the banks of the Warrego River, just north of Cunnamulla.
Have you got a massive hat? Is that's the rules, isn't it? Or is it?
Well, I think the further north you go, the broader the brim. So, I'd have more of a stockman's hat.
Okay.
A bit of mulga, you've got a duck between.
Yeah.
So not that big.
I must say I went to Beef Week a couple of years ago, and I realised that is like the Akubra Land Cruiser Convention in Queensland.
And R.M. Williams, yeah.
And, mate, that roaring trade. You go down the main street there and you're like, that is just more Land Cruisers than I've ever seen and more Akubras than I've ever seen. And I realised that I'm a real city kid because I didn't know you wear the light-coloured Akubra for the good events. and then the darker one for work.
Well, the light one gets stained if you're working in it. That's for sure.
Well, obviously, I never thought about that because I don't do any real work. But I didn't realise. I didn't realise the etiquette.
The bigger the planes, the wider the planes, the wider the hat. So
there you go.
That's your rule of thumb.
There you go. See, and these are the things that I always enjoy learning when I go into different worlds. There's always, the rules of the niche. So out there in Charleville, and what was the family business out there?
So sheep and cattle. It's not the best country out there. It's not the most productive. So we didn't do a lot of breeding. We would buy young stock, fatten them up, essentially let them grow up. And it's broad. It's big farming, so it wasn't the biggest farm in the district or the biggest station. It was just under 150,000 acres. There was a much bigger one next door, but it wasn't small by any standards either.
No, and I always find the numbers out there reasonably baffling. Like, all sense of space stops making sense when you talk to people about the size of their properties.
Yes, yeah. It's when the neighbours are 20 or 30 k's away and you're driving on a dirt road.
Yeah.
That type of thing.
It's an hour to get to the post box from the house, like at the front gate, that sort of stuff, where you go, well, I understand why you need a chopper. Because your time management is not great when you've got to get from one bit to the other. How did your family end up out there? How did that happen?
Oh, well, my grandfather had two sons that he put out there. Well, my great-grandfather, I should say. My great-grandfather had two sons, and he put one in just south of Charleville and the other one near Blackall. And that's where the Frasers settled. So they came over from Scotland in the purge that brought many Scottish families to Australia. My grandfather actually stayed at a boarding house at Cathedral Place. What is Cathedral Place these days?
Oh, wow.
When he first landed in Brisbane. And then he went up to Townsville and started working.
Bloody hell. Sorry, before we go on, for the uneducated like me, could you explain the purge? I'm actually not familiar with this.
So, ironically, a lot of Scots were forced from their homes because they lived there and paid rent to the landlord. And a lot of Scots were moved off their land so the landlord could run sheep. Ironically, they came out here and often made their money in sheep.
Really?
So the very animal that pushed them out of Scotland
was the one that
made the money. Yeah, when they got here.
Okay, and that was just something where they went, there's no space.
Yeah,
bugger off.
Yeah, I want to get rid of that small village and these farmers who are living there and not paying me much rent, and I want to run cattle in Scotland.
So that's a better thing. Wow.
We were from Bewley in up in the Highlands.
Yeah, right.
So we were Highland Frasers up in Bewley in north of Scotland in the hills, and they came over.
Highland Frasers. That sounds great. There's a movie in that, isn't there?
Well, it is funny. My wife started watching James Fraser on Outlander, and that is one of the branches of the family I come from.
Really?
Yeah, that is exactly one of the branches.
And see, how extraordinary is this sort of stuff? Again, mate, this is my problem. I'm endlessly fascinated by things. But that's extraordinary. So that's all part of. And with, once they sort of go, right, you're out of here, do you know how they then made the decision to go, oh, well, Australia is obviously the next most sensible place to go because not close or convenient?
No, I think it was just the opportunity. So William Fraser, came out from Scotland. And as I said, he landed at Cathedral Place here in Brisbane. He was a carpenter.
Yeah, okay.
And then he went up to Townsville to work, but he met a widower who owned the boarding house. And he rang her from Townsville and said, come up and we'll get married. And they did.
Smooth.
And so that was it was a pretty simple offer. And they went to Townsville. They, I think at least one of, I don't know if my grandfather was born in Townsville or not. I think he was born down here in Brisbane. But certainly his brother was born up in Townsville.
Wow.
And they came back down to Brisbane and they settled here in New Farm.
Yeah, okay.
Just up the road from here, actually, funnily enough.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And that was where... Oh, and just to put some context around this, do you sort of roughly know timing when the Frasers sort of first came to Australia?
I don't know when they first arrived. It would have been between 1860 and 1870. I know by 1890 they were living in New Farm.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
In Brisbane.
Mate, they were well ahead of the curve. They knew that was going to be a good spot. And they went, do you know what? Another 100 plus years, this will be, there's a bowls club going in down here.
Well, they actually had an acre just up.
Did they really?
An acre just up the road.
Does that make you sick now? Wow, an acre in New Farm. There you go. Oh, mate, that's where the joke always goes, isn't it? If only they'd held on to
If
that.
only they'd held on to that. But the money was in farming. You know, it was in the wool clip.
Well, it was primary production, wasn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, what else did you do other than...
So they headed west and put a son in Charleville and a son up outside Blackwell.
Wow. And I don't know if you'd even know this, but how do you even come up with those spots as spots to go? Do you know how those decisions came about?
I think it was based on the rail lines.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah,
So
they were
you
the
go-
main distribution points.
Yeah, gotcha. So the rail lines existed.
Yeah.
And you could basically go, righto, you're going out there, you're going out there, split the difference, we'll see how we go.
Well, there was bullock trains as well. So, yeah, with the rail lines, the rail lines would have been there by the time they settled, yes. Yeah. And I mean, this is kind of what a father does with his son. So shortly after they settled at Wyandra outside Charleville, there was a bushfire and the homestead burnt down.
Oh,
so
good start, yep.
They built the exact same homestead that they'd built up outside Longreach near Blackwell there. They built that one down in Charleville. So the two sons got two farms of equal size.
Wow.
And a house that was identical to each other.
That's pretty good going.
It is.
That's more than most of us could hope to give to our kids these days, isn't it? But like, that's really special. Like, that is actually quite lovely. And then to have built the same
The same homestead.
Isn't that? That's actually pretty magic. Do those homesteads still exist, or are they?
I know the one down in, yes, I believe they both exist. Certainly the one that I was born, that I was raised on, it exists today, and a lovely gentleman from the Gold Coast has retired out there.
Oh, you're kidding?
Yep.
Yeah, and you're still in touch?
Yeah, about once every 5 or 6 years,
Yeah. Well, again, I'm sure not a lot changes.
He's probably looked after the house better than Dad did.
Really?
Well, Dad was one of those farmers that, you don't make any money in the home paddock. But because he's a retired engineer and he leases out the land to a farmer who runs cattle on it, he spends his time looking after the homestead.
Oh.
And it's amazing to go back to a farm that you're raised on, and it's actually better than your memories.
Yeah.
Because quite often when you're a kid, you have rose-coloured glasses on.
Oh, absolutely. And you think how wonderful everything was, and you go back and you go, "Ugh."
Yeah.
That's actually really lovely that it's sort of been not only just cared for, but also, improved and loved. But he's right, it's the same as, the mechanic with the broken down car, and you're like, that's a future me problem.
Yeah.
Wow, okay. So they had the two, and both just running stock was
stock,
sort of the main.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to grow too much.
No. It's pretty dry out there. I mean, we had, I think we ended up with 4 artesian bores, which is just your critical water source for watering your stock.
And again, for Queen Street cowboys like myself, artesian bore, make me sound like I know what I'm talking about.
It's this natural reservoir of water which exists beneath the ground across a lot of the outback. It's in pockets. We've got to be very careful with it because there's not a lot of work that's been done to understand it. So,
right.
The flow rates used to be huge. So we would flow, if your bore flowed at, say, 3,000 litres an hour, that would allow you to flow an open bore drain for 3 kilometres because the evaporation rates are so high. Back in the John Howard government days, they actually paid, they had a lot of grants for farmers to cap slow the bore rates down, but then to put polythene pipe underground and have watering troughs. So there was a deal done of, we don't want to over-extract from this amazing water resource that we have. We don't know its capacity in its entirety, and we don't know how the different pockets of water relate to each other and interplay. And they do flow through rock and filter.
Wow.
So John Howard, to his credit, one of the many great things he did as Prime Minister of his country was to preserve the artesian basin by giving farmers grants to slow the flow rate down so that we could preserve this great natural resource.
And do we still not understand that particularly well, or do we have a better knowledge now?
Look, there's a bit more work being done, but that's why a lot of farmers are opposed to fracking, because they don't understand how the extraction of the gas and the water that comes out, how it's going to affect...
How that will affect the
artesian basin. So that's the concern with a lot of farmers have with fracking in mining.
And see, these are always the things that, again, as the good old boys out there would refer to us as, latte sippers. But we don't understand the intricacies of that sort of stuff, and I don't. Like, mate, to go to the tap and turn it on. That's, when my son goes, Dad, have we got any water? I'm like, yeah, mate, got it on tap. Like, it's not and that's one of the great joys, is it's not something we ever have to think about. Whereas people who do live, work off the land, they're like water, pretty serious consideration.
Oh, it's live or die out there. So if you go out to Charleville today, they still, most of their water is from the artesian basin, and the particular pocket that they have is full of sulphur. So it's a very distinctive smell when you jump in the shower.
Quite pungent.
Quite pungent.
I've been through that part of the world.
one of our bores, it came out of the ground at about 48, 49 degrees.
Yeah, wow.
So we used to cool it. So you didn't need a hot water system.
No, you wouldn't. That's pretty toasty.
Yeah, we had cooling towers
to
run
trying
the
to
water
slow it
through
down.
the house. Yeah.
Wow. And see, that is incredible. But what's more incredible is that we don't have that much information about.
Not as much. A lot more research could be done in understanding that water, because it is the lifeblood of the West. There's no doubt about it.
And I do see these great separations, and this is why I'm just always interested in asking questions, because there's so much, as we just blunder through our daily lives, that we don't understand. And because of, the speed of life these days, when do you ever get the chance to stop and understand when, you got fractions of a second to try and catch people's attention? Whereas what I think is missing is meandering conversation, because I'm, as I said, mate, just endlessly fascinated. Like that's quite extraordinary. And again, unless you have that lived experience and you know how that gets there and how it, it doesn't just, some mild inconvenience if it doesn't work at home. Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary, because I truly didn't understand, like I heard of, but doesn't mean much to a city boy.
And I think that's where a lived experience is really important, and particularly when you're dealing with government. Government is a broadsword in terms of you make a law and it affects everyone.
Yeah.
And so I think a lived experience is critical in understanding the unintended consequences of legislation.
Well, I think that's the big one, isn't it? Because if you don't even have an awareness of this sort of stuff, and there's so many things in so many areas, and I guess that's the thing that I continue to discover as I get older. The joy of my 20s was I knew everything, Stu. And now in my mid-40s, I realise I know absolutely nothing, which is a nice place to find yourself.
Yeah.
But, mate. Anyway, sorry, totally off track, but this is the main joy of this show, is I love just, meandering conversation. Mate, back on track. So we understand how you got out there, how we got the two there, we got the houses there, we got the same houses, and then you come along.
I come along. So I was the first son, but youngest child, so I've got two older sisters. And look, I was quite a sickly kid. So Mum took me to the doctors when I was about 18 months to get some test results back. And the doctor kind of gave her the bad news. He said, look, what he has is not curable. You should go home and enjoy the time you have left with him.
At 18 months old?
18 months old.
Great.
Yeah. And as a parent myself of kids, I just can't understand. I can't fully comprehend what would have been going through Mum and Dad's mind.
Oh, well, you think about anything that goes on. I mean, you were telling me about some of the things going on with your kids and the things that they're doing, and how much you sort of watch them there, and you're going, "Oh God, I hope it." To be told you're 18 months old, nothing we can do.
And so
shatter your world.
And what it was, my kidneys were failing.
Great.
And the type of kidney infection I had ruled me out for a transplant because the new kidneys would be infected.
Oh, great.
So, and look, doctors have to give it to you. There's no way I would like to be in a doctor's shoes delivering that type of news.
Some of the stuff they have to do, you don't envy that even a little bit, do you?
But, Mum and Dad wanted other options, and he certainly put them in touch with a doctor in the city, so they did the 20-hour return drive to Brisbane.
Ah, nice, yeah.
And look, I'm lucky they had the capacity to do that. To forward that, because not all families have that.
No way. And again, a 20-hour drive, way off topic and not important to the story, but what on earth would they have been driving then? What are you getting around in?
Probably a Falcon or something.
Yeah.
Would have had a town car.
Yeah. So taking the Falcon from, into the city.
Into the city. They would have. would have been staying with family friends,
Yeah.
and while I was getting tests and things. And look, my condition was able to be managed through medication.
Yeah, right.
But it kept, I'd be in remission, which is when my kidneys were working, and I would relapse when they would stop working. I've had biopsies and all types of things, but the important thing for me, obviously, was it was able to be managed. And by the time I hit about 22, I had outgrown it, which can happen.
Wow.
They can just self-correct with early onset, and that's what certainly has happened to me. So for the last, 28 years, I haven't had a problem with my kidneys.
Yeah, right. So it just sorted itself out for...
It sorted itself out. Now, if you ask my wife, she'll say it's around the time I met her. So, obviously she's cured me.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, you didn't realise everything you were doing wrong, Stu.
Obviously not.
Yeah, I think the real question is do you pack the dishwasher wrong?
I pack the dishwasher correctly.
You pack it correctly. Is that a statement that would be agreed? Because I pack it wrong, I've discovered.
Yeah, no. When the girls or Jen pack the dishwasher, it's more like the Swedish chef.
Right. Yeah, I just close my eyes and frisbee stuff. Okay, well, that's nice. Well, I'm glad that she, helped that to course correct. That's quite the miracle.
So back to the story, I guess. I went to school and Wyandra State School. It was 2 composite classes.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many kids in that cohort? 12?
About 20.
20, there you go.
Yeah, there was about
that was a big school.
It was a big school, yeah. And it was interesting being, so it was 2 composite classes effectively, 1 to 3 and 4 to 7 were taught in the classroom. I loved it because you were brought along at the speed you could learn at.
Yeah, right.
It was great opportunities. I remember when we moved down to the city, the math I'd been doing out there was a lot higher grade because they were just able to extend me.
Yeah, because they went, he's got this, we'll do the next thing.
Yep. And they did that for a lot of kids. It wasn't just myself. So that's a great opportunity of a small
so if you needed help, you could go further or vice versa.
And Wyandra was one of those communities where, your school principal held a lot of sway in the community, as did the local policeman. We didn't have a permanent priest. They'd come down from Charleville once a month to do mass. For those kids, it was pretty easy from that point of view. And that was a real, my wife was also born in regional, on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. We both say, the church was a big part of community coming together. It was a social opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, it provided an opportunity, and particularly when you are separated by, work and distance. And again, didn't have the glorious telecommunications we have now. You had to get together to see people.
Definitely. So it was one of those small communities would come together that have, once a year we'd have a race day at Wyandra, which was obviously well populated for the district. It was a lot of fun.
I could imagine. Dirt racetrack as well.
Yeah.
What's that one out there? That Henley on Todd. I never stop laughing at that. The
rowing regatta.
Yeah, the rowing regatta on the Todd River, which never has any water in it, and so they're running down like it's Fred Flintstone, but in a boat. That Australian larrikin comedy never fails to amuse me.
And I think regional Queensland, it has those characters.
Oh, absolutely. Well, big mate, live out there, let's be frank, can be pretty shit. Yeah. So you'd want to have a pretty good sense of humour to deal with some of the things that you have to deal with out there.
Definitely. And so moving on, Mum was really worried about my health condition and that I wouldn't survive boarding school because I needed constant monitoring of the kidneys working. So the family moved down to the city. We moved down to Logan City for secondary schooling for myself, and my middle sister, my older sister, was in boarding school at Toowoomba. And that was a very different experience. I mean, we moved on to an acre block in Logan City, so that was pretty good fun from that point of view. And it was that kind of area, before curbing and channelling. I had great mates next door as neighbours and up the road. So, the rule was be home before dusk, or your mum would stand on the back patio and call your name until you came home, and then you're in trouble.
Simple times.
It was simple times, and it was good fun though. It was great fun.
It would have been, mate. You could just get out and do whatever you want. And
Yeah, we had bushland nearby. You could sneak the old motorbike down there and go for a drive around. It was good fun.
Little blat through there with with the local kids. That's really nice, and that sort of education experience there. So that took you all the way through. There was that.
Well, I did grade 8, 9, and 10 at Trinity College at Beenleigh, and then by that stage, my middle sister had graduated school, so I was the only one left at school at the end of grade 10. Dad had always he went through Nudgee College as a boarder, and he always wanted me to go to Nudgee, but the opposite end of the city when you live down in Logan City, a very long commute.
That would have been.
So the compromise was I was going to go to Gregory Terrace as a day boy. And get the train in. So I'd get the 45, 50-minute train ride from Logan Lee Station into the central station in the city, and then a good 10 or 15-minute walk from there up to Gregory Terrace. And that was a very different schooling environment. My first time seeing a GPS school, a lot of pride in the school, a lot of pride in the achievements of the school and in yourself. So I really enjoyed that. But it was also around the same time the dad gave me the tap on the shoulder and said, "Do you want to go back on the farm?" Because he'd kept it. He'd commuted backwards and forwards for that time that I did 8, 9 and 10 in Brisbane. He'd spend a couple of weeks on the farm, a couple of weeks in the city, and I'd go out on holidays and just have an amazing time, riding motorbikes, driving cars, riding horses, that type of thing. But I'd seen Dad, he didn't see a future in farming. And he didn't see a future in farming for me, but he wanted it to be my decision because he felt that I had a right to go back on the family farm if I wanted to. And I was born in the 70s, and I saw the drought that happened in the 70s. And back in those days, there was no government subsidies for farmers in drought. So the only subsidy was bullets to shoot your stock. And I saw Dad after he shot 500 sheep. And I just didn't think I could do that.
No. And I think that's a reality of that life that, again, they don't put that in the guidebook.
No. And how do you pick yourself up?
Honestly, I don't know.
And I just didn't think I had that reserve of strength to be working. You can be the best farmer in the world, but a bad drought will get you.
Well, that's it. And there's genuinely nothing that can be done.
No.
Like, that is harsh country.
Because you're shooting the older stock so that you have money left to feed the ones that remain.
Fuck. And again, how do you, literally have to, hand of God, like, you have to choose who lives and who dies. And and again, this is order of things, but you just...
Yeah. And look, he stared at a wall for 5 days.
Yeah. Well, that's it. There's no joy in that. Like,
no.
There's no joy in having to do that. And
no.
the sad part is that's actually the better of two very bad options.
Well, you don't want them to starve, and you can't. And people say, "Oh, why don't you give them away?" And, well, they're not even worth the cost of transport.
No, and nobody would want them. And if the drought is far-reaching, there's nowhere to go.
There's no one there to buy them, and you're sitting there saying, "Well, if I don't do something and take action, they will starve to death."
Yes.
Horrifically.
Yes. Worst way possible.
Worst way possible. So this is the kinder, the lesser of two really bad choices. And also you're doing it so that you can afford to feed the ones that are remaining because you don't have enough money to feed them all.
And that is brutal. And I have to imagine that was part, obviously your family believed in good education and getting, but then to give you that option, I mean, there's a kindness in that as well to say, look, if you do want to do this, if this is something you want.
Yes. And I just did not see... I just didn't think I had that reserve to go through what he and Mum went through.
Yeah.
And so I said, no, I'm happy in the city, Dad. So if you want to sell, then you sell. And he said, well, that's what I wanted to do, but not against your wishes. So
wow.
So we sold the farms, and look, by that stage, Dad was also going into politics. So he did about 12 years on the Paroo Shire Council out in Cunnamulla.
Yeah, right.
And then he ran for one of the divisions in Logan City and became Deputy Mayor of Logan City in that first term. And was quite successful. Like Dad was a square peg in a round hole in the farming side. He didn't have great patience with animals. He was the worst shearer I've ever seen. Sheep. I think Mum spent more time stitching the sheep back up after he tried to shear them. But look, we really enjoyed that time in Logan, and he enjoyed being on council.
And what drew him to that? Because obviously he got involved out there first.
He did.
Or was that just because somebody has to put their hand up? Or?
Someone's got to put their hands up. I mean, most farmers in local government, the thing they'll tell you about is roads and bridges.
Yeah, okay.
And a failure of provision of service in that area. Because that's the thing that affects them is their ability to actually transport stock and travel safely with their family. So
roads and bridges.
Was a big one that got Dad involved.
Because he just hit a frustration point and he just went...
Someone's got to do something. And look, Dad used to always say to me that you can stand on the sidelines complaining, but if you don't get on the field, then you become part of the problem. And that also resonates a lot with me, that at some stage you can pick the problem out to people and point it out, but if you're not willing to get in there and solve it, then you are part of that problem.
Well, absolutely, because all problems are simple from a distance and all problems are simple in theory. Everything's easy.
That is true.
Apparently.
So back to Dad, he went into state government. So the seat of Springwood was created in 1986.
Yeah.
He ran, there's a story here if you've got time.
Mate, I've always got time for stories.
So what was really interesting was he ran for pre-selection in Springwood, and he lost by one vote.
Oh, ouch!
Which hurt a lot. Oh. And they later discovered that one of the attendees was under 18. You've got to be 18 to be a member of the party and the National Party back in those days and vote. So the meeting, instead of being disregarded, Bob Sparks rang up Dad, who was the president of the party, and he said, Ewan, you'll be endorsed by the party, but we're going to keep the other guy as well. And the other guy was backed by Sir Joe. Dad was backed by Sir Robert Sparks. And so we talk about, before the merger of the Liberal and National parties, we used to talk about three-cornered contests, which was the Nationals, the Liberals and Labor. This was a four-cornered contest where the Nationals had two candidates running against each other. The Liberals had one and Labor had one, and there were a couple of independents as well. Oh. So, can you imagine today if one party had two candidates in the same...
just jousting against each other, you go...
But look, because of his local profile, he was able to win the seat of Springwood and went into state government. And that was the very turbulent times of the last National Party government under Sir Joe.
Because that was rock and roll times here in Brisbane, wasn't it? If I recall correctly.
It was. So Dad was integral in the exposing of the illegal brothels.
Really?
So he did a tour. So around the time that Paul Corners, I think it was, did the Shadow State, I think they called it. Dad did the follow-up interview the next night, he and another member of Parliament, to say, yes, they exist and yes, we're going to do something about it.
Oh, shit, really?
Yeah. So he and as a backbencher. So he was pretty brave there.
But that's terrifying.
Yeah.
Because to put yourself out there like that, you're not going to get, polite knocks at the house to say thank you.
No, he didn't. And he probably he doubled down a bit more as well when he challenged the Premier at a party room meeting. And he challenged him over the development of what was to be the world's tallest building here in Brisbane.
Right.
And that the Premier had misled the party room over his commitment and support on behalf of the state government to the developer. And so Dad got up at a party room meeting and accused the Premier of lying to the party room.
Oh.
The Premier tried to close the meeting. Bill Gunn was the deputy. The Premier actually walked out of got up, closed the meeting and walked out.
Wow.
But he wasn't actually chairing the meeting. So Bill Gunn, who was chairing, took over and gave Dad about 3 hours to put up or shut up. So prove your claims or not. Now, Dad had a photographic memory, and he'd seen some correspondence between the Premier's department and this developer, which committed the government to renting about 20 or 30 floors of this new building. So they had almost a financial guarantee. And so when that was discovered, Sir Joe never attended another party room meeting of the National Party.
Oh, wow.
And he was rolled as Premier shortly later by Mike Ahern.
Wow.
And if there's a couple of books that have been written on this. The first one was by Paul Reynolds called Lock, Stock and Barrel, and he details that. And the other one is in the final series by Matt Condon. Jackson Jokers is the final book, and he actually interviewed me because Dad had passed away by the time Matt was writing the last of his trilogy. And I recalled what I had learnt, and he also spoke to Paul Reynolds and got his notes as well.
Far out. Mate, there's an underbelly series here, isn't there?
Oh, well, I think there's one's being done, but not on what the goings on the political side.
Yeah.
That's for sure. And so, look, Mike Ahern repaid Dad by a few months after. I think it was about 6 months later. He made Dad a minister in the government, and then when Mike was rolled by Russell Cooper, Russell kept Dad on as a minister through. He only did one term in state government, but he did rise to the ministry.
Wow. Because I've been to the restaurant in the Valley that says, we regret to inform you that this is no longer a brothel. The little steak restaurant. But it's got the, what was the bathhouse down underneath it as well. And you're
The
like,
bubbles. And,
you're like, wow, this is, sleepy old Brisbane town. We got some...
There were illegal casinos. There was everything.
Mate, loose.
It was very loose. But
I feel like we missed the real rock and roll days of all this stuff. Okay.
I wouldn't say it was better. Certainly safer times now.
No part of me thinks it was better, but geez, it was colourful.
It was very colourful.
Wow. I didn't realise that either. I didn't realise your old boy was so involved in...
He was very involved in cleaning up.
In these things, well, I guess, again, shining a light on it.
Yeah, very, very involved in that side of cleaning up. And then after he left Parliament, he lost to Molly Robson in the great swing to Labor that occurred after so many years of National Party state government. Dad volunteered for Logan City Council on their Economic Development Board. He did that for about a decade as a volunteer, and that's when he started lending money as a business. And it started over a pie.
like many great Australian stories. Yeah, okay, so started over a pie.
So Dad had a friend.
I hope it was a good pie.
Yeah, he ended up being a good pie. So Dad had a friend who was a builder, and they used to build houses together. Dad would put the money in, the builder would build the houses, and they used to call specky homes, speculative homes back in the day. When housing was a lot more available than it is today. And so the builder came back and he said, you've got to help him, Ewan, my local guy. He said, where I buy my pies. He said, the shop fitters are threatening to beat him up. He paid for his shops to be fitted. Oh, no. This is probably back in those loose days you're referring to. And he couldn't pay the shop fitters, so they were threatening him with violence.
Oh, great.
And he said, look, can you lend him some money so he can pay them back? And so Dad went down and chatted to a shop guy, and I think the guy needed about $25,000 to pay for the fit-out.
Which is a reasonable chunk of change at the time.
Back in about 85.
It's a lot of pies.
87, yeah. And so he lent the guy the money, but he did say to him, look, George, how are you going to pay me back? He said, I'll pay you back with a sack of potatoes a week. And Dad's like, come on, George, let's be serious. He said, no. He said, look, he was a hard-working immigrant. And he said, look, all those Australians that run fish and chip shops, he said, they're lazy. They buy in the chips pre-cut. He said, I go to the markets. And he said, once a week I buy bags of potatoes. And he said, I work through the night and I chip them by hand. And he said, I get 500 $1 scoops out of that sack of potatoes. So he said, I'll pay you back with a sack of potatoes a week.
Wow.
Which was $500 a week.
Okay, that's actually amazing.
And that's literally how he repaid the loan.
And good little Good little wisecrack there too. I like that.
Yes, a sack of potatoes.
Wow.
And the business started from there. And so we help people, even to today. I still run this business with my business partner.
Yeah.
We help people that don't fit inside the banking model.
Which is most of them.
Which is a lot of people.
If you've got an idea, you're stuffed.
Yeah.
If you've just got an idea and a work ethic, good luck to you.
It is hard. It is hard for small business here, and this comes down to this creation of opportunities versus obstacles. If you're trying to start a small business in Australia today, first off, if you're borrowing less than $330,000, then it's treated as a consumer loan. So we are saying to the banks, ignore the fact that this is a business loan.
Yeah.
Treat this like you would be if you're buying a home to live in.
Yes.
And then, you've got to look at all their capacity to pay. You've got to make sure you're not doing predatory lending. You've got to look at tax returns, their ability to service the loan, and their proven performance. And then you've got to put in some stress testing around it. If rates go up by 2 or 3%, are they likely to default or not?
Yeah, what happens then?
These are all the things we ask our banks to look at when people go to lend money. And if you're starting a business, you can meet none of those.
Absolutely.
Because you've got no proven track record for that business. You don't have the capacity. You can't show a prior proven capacity to pay because you're starting up, and you need all the things that you need to start up a business, like a shop fit out. So we've made it so hard.
Oh, mate,
for people to get out there and have a go.
As somebody who has worked for themselves, I have discovered that, and again, this is just my personal opinion, but as a small business owner, when you go and look for help, the answer to everything is eat shit and die.
Definitely no.
There's no help.
There's no help at all.
It's the only thing where people can steal from you and not pay you with no consequence.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of people that we can't lend to today that we used to lend to.
Yeah.
And it's that regulation creep.
Yeah.
And at some stage it goes, I think what government is trying to do is to de-risk everything. Which
makes sense because, stuff gets out of hand, you got to pull it back in and it's a cycle.
I understand that. But in risk management, risk sits alongside opportunity.
Absolutely, hand in hand.
So if you de-risk and remove all risk from a situation, you're also removing the opportunity.
Absolutely.
And
nothing good happens. No good decisions are made by a committee.
No. I've been on a few committees that have probably made a couple of good decisions, but
they'd be in the minority, I guess.
So I do think it comes back to that creation of opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think what you need people to be is informed so that they know all the risks and they're making an informed judgment. Where there's a power imbalance on information, I totally get it. But where someone has been informed of the risks and the opportunities and they make an informed choice, it's about giving the individual back the right to do something. And this is what I loved with David Crisafulli as Premier, and why I'm very aligned with the LNP with the cyclone that we had through. So the public servants would have been putting immense pressure on the Premier to just shut everything down, shut all the schools, get everyone to stay at home because that is the most least risk outcome. The Premier said, I'm going to give you all the information and I'm going to let shops work out whether it's safe for them to open or not, given all the information. I'm going to let principals decide, given all the information, whether their school can open or not, because we are fighting in an era where we've got reduced productivity.
Oh, yes.
We've got declining education standards or outcomes. So we can't afford to keep shutting everything down. No. But if people make an informed choice, and obviously some of the schools on the coastline, particularly those in low-lying areas, yes, very sensible, you've got to shut down.
Bail out.
But it's about informing people and then letting them make an informed choice.
And it was quite funny. I actually smiled, having been through a couple of things now, that I watched the rollout of this one and I went, it's so lovely to have information in advance and reasonable, everything felt very reasonable because it's such a, it's catastrophic. When you have to take the kids home, then everything you've got planned, your work shuts when you work for yourself.
Yep.
My partner and I work together in our own business. So when everything changes, our ability to make money stops because we've got to look after
your productivity goes from 100% to zero.
To zero. And all the parents you speak to, when they finally school's back open again and you've all been holding it together and you get... Yeah, I really enjoyed the fact that it had that capacity, and I guess I didn't think too hard about it.
Well, it's also about giving people agency back.
Yeah.
So if you constantly believe that by centralising everything we can solve everyone's problems, you're deauthorising people. You're stopping them from having the ability to solve their own problems.
Well, you are, and as you try and shove everything into the bell curve, you do miss the outliers, which again is where the special things happen.
I agree. And as Australians, I think we are people that solve our own problems.
Absolutely.
We don't sit around waiting for someone to come along.
No, you just go, that's buggered, I should fix it.
Yeah.
Because I go through Salisbury and you look at the buildings there and you go, we built aircraft, munitions, tanks, like whatever it was, we're like, yep, figure it out.
Yep.
We got this. And you go into some of those buildings and the scale of some of those, and you walk in and you're like, what were they doing here? And you're like, oh, they were building X, Y, Z. And I'm like, what? You know, 2 minutes from my house was where, major manufacturing and war efforts and these sorts of things were done. And you go, like it just happened.
It happened because we got on and we got things done.
Had to get it done.
And there was leadership as well, in order for that to happen. So we've sat on our hands on the Olympic precinct for 3 years.
Absolutely.
And we've accomplished zero.
Oh, well, that one's been a hot potato, hasn't it?
So, and obviously, the Olympic announcement's coming out very soon on venues, and there's going to be someone who's going to be disappointed. That's just the way it goes. And I'm sure people have mixed feelings on land uses and things like that. I totally get that. But we have to make a call and we have to move forward as a society.
Well, you do, because if you put your hand up for the thing, you've got to prepare for the thing.
Yeah.
But I just love it because, in my most humble of opinion, this will be the most movement we've had since Expo 88. And for anybody as old as us, like Brisbane went from the Stone Ages into the modern world, preparing for Expo 88. And if we hadn't have done those things, we wouldn't have, our wonderful South Bank Parklands, all these amazing things that got done. But I hadn't really seen, that sort of concerted effort for something special where the attention of the whole world will come back on our little part.
Yes, yeah. And culturally, we grew so much as a community through Expo. I remember Expo and I was allowed to wander around a bit.
Same.
And I really enjoyed it. And just seeing the different communities, seeing the New Zealand Pavilion was amazing.
It was magical. Actually, I remember the New Zealand one being pretty specky.
It was pretty good.
Yeah.
And then obviously the Swiss one brought over the chocolates and you learn a lot more about, the world came to Brisbane.
Yeah, it did.
And we grew and changed. Our palate changed, what we ate, what we drank, and it really introduced us to the world.
We grew up, didn't we?
We did.
Rather than being little country town Brisbane, that was our first, our first step into, maybe we can be a big city. Like the smart asses down south who keep telling us that they're, you go, come on, it's all right up here. But that was a really magical moment. And I guess having lived through that and watched that and remembering that, I sort of go, well, there hasn't been anything like that.
No.
To that extreme where there is actually an opportunity to do things. And absolutely, they're tough questions. That's why I don't, I'm glad I can just be a peanut in the gallery because I think that they are tough. And as you said, you can't please everybody. That's...
No, the best...
For the community, I mean, isn't that what we're trying to decide? Is what's in the best interest?
And that's it. The best we can hope for is a group of intelligent, experienced people sitting down, looking at all the information and saying this offers the best outcome for Brisbane, for Queensland and for Australia.
To do something special.
To do something incredibly
special. And set
special.
us up for the next couple of decades to go, okay, now we've got all these great places to do these other great things. Now that we can have Taylor Swift at Suncorp Stadium, when the next big thing comes through, because we used to, it has been quite amazing watching Brisbane transform.
And some of so it's not just obviously the 21 days of the Olympic and Paralympic
of course.
Games. It's the gift of public transport, of new lines being opened up, new theatres for sport, for swimming, for music, for the arts. The gift is massive from the Games if we get it right. The opportunities for people are huge.
I must say, as I watched the Games opening in Paris, I actually imagined my friends in performing arts watching what was done by the Parisians, who just Parisians are very good at, middle finger to the man sort of stuff. And I thought that opening ceremony just rocked because it was amazing. It was unashamedly them. And they just went, you know what, this is our way and we're doing it our way. And I imagined all my friends in the arts just going, oh, here we go. The door's open to do something incredible here in Brisbane. And we can bring our own to this. And as you said, it's not just the sports, it's all of these ancillary supporting industries. It's transformative, like this opportunity. And I guess I wish that was the tone that I heard more often rather than just, poo-pooing everything that is discussed.
And I think that's the creation of opportunities.
Do you know what, Stuart? I always say this with everybody that works with me, is I say to them that if you can point out problems, I unfortunately don't think you're very bright. The people who come in with solutions, they're the people I want to talk to, because any idiot can stand back and go, oh, that's not going to work. I'm like, yeah, no shit. Like, thanks. I'm very impressed at your contribution. What would you propose? Yeah. And they're the discussions that I guess I just want to hear more of, is like, let's how do we make things better? And I guess it's probably a big part of all of this, Stu.
It's a big part of motivating me. It's looking, you have limitations around your resources and your land. So, but then you say, what can we do? What are the opportunities? What's possible? And probably even what's impossible. Let's really shoot for the stars and then work our way back from there. So there's land the government owns, but then there's private land which the government doesn't own, but they might have access to.
Absolutely. And maybe there's something there that you can do together, because that's how really great things are done.
Yeah.
And like, what was it? I was stuck in traffic over the bridge that goes over the river, Indro Way, because, one person gets a flat tyre and then half of Brisbane stops. You're going in there, and I was thinking of, I was in Tokyo mid last year, and like their one gun expressway where it's like layers of freeway up over the top, where they've actually like planned the whole thing out. And even, you go around London and they're out of ring and that sort of stuff. And again, I know this probably feels like pipe dream stuff, but when you see that sort of major infrastructure work in places operating, and you go, well, there are solutions.
Yes.
Might be a bit weird, but, double-decker freeway, that stuff is unreal.
So a second level to the Walter Taylor?
Oh, mate, second level to the Walter Taylor, second level to the M1. Like that staggered freeway up in the air, because they're like, oh, we don't have any space. What are we going to do? Go up. Righto.
Yep.
Some stuff seems really ridiculous when it's proposed, and then you see it and you're like, oh, no, it's brilliant.
Look, good infrastructure is ahead of its time.
Always.
If you're waiting until you need it, it's too late.
Too late. Like the Gateway Bridge. I remember people going, oh, that's too much. And now we've got two of the things.
Yeah. Exactly like the Gateway Bridge. I think, good infrastructure is ahead of its time.
And that was a long way ahead of its time. When you think about, when was that finished? My math isn't good enough to even remember. But
it was back in I'm pretty sure it was around Expo 88.
Yeah, around that sort of time. And again, that was so big.
Yeah.
For what it was. But that sort of bold thinking, and I think that's probably where our discussion keeps circling back to, there's just no capacity for bold thinking, is there?
I think we're afraid of it. We're afraid of bold thinking.
Absolutely, because it upsets people.
It does, and also, we want to do everything that, take the risk out of everything, which takes the opportunity, which goes back to that point of, creating opportunity for people. Because government... I look at Queensland and we don't have a lot of head offices here.
No, we don't.
If we have a good company, like a Suncorp or a Metway, we kept it here. We handcuffed it to Queensland for as long as we could. But now, I think the latest change you've got the bank being taken over by ANZ. I think that's still underway. A lot of the directors now live down in Sydney.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of decisions being made here. So particularly here in Queensland, it's even more critical that government creates opportunities, because the head offices of the large firms that operate here, they're not based here, they're based interstate or overseas. So if you want to create opportunity, government has to be an active player in doing that and selling Queensland to the world.
And I couldn't agree more, because again, these are things that, as a middle-aged, getting older man that I, shake my fist at the sky about. And I go, why aren't we trying to lead the world in STEM, in data, in technology, why don't we have a Silicon Valley? We've got so many smart people here. Why do we not have things around this? And, I know there's one floor of one building in one place. But there's no, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, the only thing I could think about is what's going out west, sort of Springfield Lakes, where the infrastructure is sort of built from scratch.
It is, yeah.
But where we actually have the capacity to build things that could be world leading in, data and tech.
Look, my concern is that we try and gold plate everything. So the obviously Silicon Valley has the highest concentration of startups in the IT world. Boston is number 2. Now, Boston started. I went and studied and looked at their chronology, and where they started their IT innovation space, they literally had some land. They had no money, so they put some hot mix down and a glorified tint over the top and delivered power and water and some services in there. And Boston's not the kind of town you want to be, outside in winter. But
it gets a bit fresh there, doesn't it?
It's very fresh. But look, that's all they had, and what they said is, come here. Try, they knew there's 52 universities in Boston.
Right.
So they knew they had a surplus of really smart kids.
Yeah, a lot of talent there. And you just got to give them a hub.
Give them a hub.
Give them somewhere to work.
Here's a hub where it is cheap to fail. So instead of having to rent an office and commit employees and hook up your server and this, that and the other, we're going to give you a space where you can come in and just, spitball ideas.
Yep, and let her rip.
And it'll either succeed. But the downside of failing was minimal.
Absolutely.
Apart from your time.
Mild inconvenience, bit of embarrassment, but you had room to give it a crack.
Well, it didn't ruin your life. You didn't go bankrupt. And so they created an area where there was an opportunity for you to just get in there. And then they also got a lot of smart people in the same vicinity.
Because that shifts your odds. That's the funny thing. You put a few brains in the same place and you go, your risk profile would change dramatically.
And the whole idea was simply to get people in there to start up all kinds of businesses and to have spend a year out of uni as your gap year, trialling that idea that's been on your mind as you finish your degree.
To go tinkering.
Yep. And then if it didn't work, you didn't lose anything, you hadn't failed, you didn't go bankrupt, you hadn't taken out a massive loan.
But you'll meet some cool people, you'll try some stuff. And this is my question, is I go, this isn't rocket science.
No.
We need some PowerPoints and some access and a few bits and pieces.
But the public also hadn't invested millions of dollars either.
No.
So it was just a space where there was a surplus of government assets, which was some land in the inner city. And they said, we're going to park this here for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, and see what happens.
And out of
you
that
take some hand-me-down bits. We'll take it.
Yeah.
And again, with people who know how to innovate, you can take zero and turn it into something.
And what they did is they just gave people the opportunity and they said the rest is up to you. And that's how, the second biggest tech industry geographically in America started.
Which is wild. And I guess I look at it as somebody who, my whole life is risk analysis. And I go, if I had to gamble on something, what would I gamble on? And I go, I would gamble on something you can replicate and multiply. In which industry? Tech. You don't need more cranes, more things, more land, more this, more that. You just got to outthink and outmaneuver and then out-execute. You got to do the thing. But we don't even have, and again, this is just me, maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't even know where that could happen.
We haven't set the space aside. I mean, we do have hubs and things, but
I've been to those hubs. Most of them are just you go to things and you go, it's I don't know, it lacked.
It's a bit structured.
Concentration of expertise.
Yes,
or the freedom to play.
Yeah,
as you said, probably too structured. That's the.
And I think if you create the opportunity, let the people go.
Yeah.
And remove the barriers and and see what they can achieve. I think that's the way to grow something like that. So I guess we'll get back to we got sidelined by politics.
So far off track. And again, these are things that we accidentally and inadvertently get excited about. But I think you'd only just been to Gregory Terrace, because I wanted to know what you did after in terms of study.
So I loved economics at school. So went to
and that's terrible. I mean, did that? I can't imagine that played well with the girls as a teenage. Well, you know what I like?
I like economics. I went to University of Queensland and studied economics, and I really liked economics. But midway through my second year, the lecturer was having a bit of fun, which lecturers do sometimes at their class, and he looked at us all and he said, "You're all going to work for the government." We're like, "No, we're not." And this is before the funds management industry really developed. And at the time, CSR was a massive, massive business. So it didn't just do sugar. It did manufacturing, it did heavy industry, it did building and construction. So CSR was one of the biggest companies on the Australian stock market by capitalisation. And he said to us, "How many economists do you think work for CSR?" And the class was silent. And then we just started yelling out numbers, 100, 150, 200. And he looked at us and he held up his finger and he said, "One. There is one economist that works at CSR." He said, "All the jobs that you go to, they're going to be in the government." And I just had cold chills down my back because I just never envisaged myself working for the government. I thought I'd be in private enterprise somewhere as, some economic tank in the background.
Some mover and shaker.
So I went literally went straight out of that lecture to the careers counsellor.
Bloody hell.
And I said, "I need options. I don't want to end up working for the government."
No.
Which is ironic considering where I want to go now.
Well, that's the most ironic, isn't it? Because I don't know, I guess you saw the different spaces and you went, "Oh, well, that's just, conservative and sensible." And you go, "I want to go and, change the world."
Exactly. So I could change a few subjects around and finish with a dual degree in economics and commerce. So
makes it even more exciting.
Yeah, well, it'll be less exciting because I ended up as an accountant. But I did summer semesters. I did 3 summer semesters where you study over the Christmas break. I loaded up my credit points, so instead of doing 4 subjects, I did 5 subjects in a semester. Within the 4-year period, I'd graduated with a double degree in economics and commerce. So I really ramped up the accounting side to qualify be able to qualify as a chartered accountant. Left there, went to KPMG and went into auditing. And look, people often pay out on auditors, but you get an amazing insight into different businesses. So I talked to CEOs of mining companies, of banking, of funds management and manufacturing as an auditor, because you'd have to go in there and ask the CFO and the CEO questions. And then you look in how they made money. You do a lot of work, obviously, on their financial statements when you're making sure that the numbers reflect accurately what they're doing. Yeah.
Well, you're really getting to lift up the hood and poke around where most people couldn't, with a level of expertise that most people wouldn't have. You would be able to see things and note patterns, and there would just be an awareness.
Yes,
I have to wildly assume from my own experience where I do similar things.
And look, you
just get to know.
And what was amazing was you'd sit there as the audit team and you'd spend 2 or 3 weeks in an organisation and you'd be writing up file notes and testing your assumptions and making sure that their controls are all working. And then the partner would come in at the very end of the audit, not look at the file notes at first up, but just look at the draft financial statements and just start asking these questions which reflected everything you'd picked up in your work.
Interesting.
Because they just could look at a set of financial statements because they'd seen so many.
Yeah, that they can spot the patterns.
They can spot the patterns. They can see where, whether the research and development side is working, whether the new product is firing, whether they're having problems with collecting funds from, from their creditors. So it was really interesting watching the partners come in and just look at the financial statements.
Isn't that amazing?
And read so much out of them.
Well, that's the expertise, isn't it? Because you see things enough times that the patterns become very obvious over a couple of decades. And I'm sure you get that now, that you could just glance at a P&L and you can go, nah, toast. There's hope in this.
A lot more of that. And so spent my time there. And then finished my qualification at Carlton United Breweries. So worked here in Fortitude Valley for Carlton United.
That sounds terrible.
It was the best employer I ever had.
Really?
And I'd probably even count that working for Dad.
Wow.
They were the best employer.
I remember stories, again, back before things were sensible, but like carton of beers a week and that sort of stuff in those sort of places.
Free beer. It was a great place to work, but they were responsible with the drinking.
Well, of course.
But really enjoyed my time at Carlton United, and then I headed off to London, which was a well-worn path for accountants at that time, was
Gotcha.
to do the 2-year working visa in London.
And so what's the trick there? Is that sort of going to the big smoke? Or just something different, or that's as exciting as accounting gets on a global scale?
I think all of the above. The pay rate was phenomenal. Back in those days, in '99, it was almost 3 to 1.
For the British pound to the Australian. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So look, that twist my arm.
Yes. So you go over there and save and get ahead. And to be honest, my wife and I came back with a house deposit out of that.
Well, absolutely, 3 to 1. Like you can't, but. Yeah, that's I'm not a smart man, but that's very simple math.
It's fantastic, and the tax rate, as a contractor was good as well.
Superb.
So we did the 2 years over there. I worked at, interestingly enough, Credit Suisse First Boston, which was a massive, Swiss American bank.
Absolutely.
And also the Royal Bank of Scotland, which had just taken over NatWest. Now, neither of those massive organisations exist today.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Let's say.
They're both gone under.
Did they get nuked in 2007? When did they?
Royal Bank of Scotland got nuked in the GFC, definitely. Yeah. But Credit Suisse got done recently. It had done a lot of lending to the Australian factoring business. I'm trying to think of the name, from Bundaberg.
No, you got me. I just know about the rums that come out of there, sugarcane champagne from the north,
and Indian Steel as well with Gupta.
Yeah, right.
They had a lot of money,
and that just
that brought them down. Yeah,
see you later.
Yeah, and it was the age-old mistake of too much concentration in your loan or investment book.
So eggs in one basket.
Yeah,
as the most basic. So their auditors missed a few things.
Well, sometimes they miss them, and sometimes they raise them with management. They highlight them, but people don't read it. So
no, and that's pretty brutal. Yeah, I must say there's been a few days of reckoning, haven't there?
They have, and more to come, I think, with the current economic climate. So, a couple of years in London, worked for some major organisations, really enjoyed it. Came back to Brisbane, and Dad had always had this dream that, I'd work with him on the farm, and obviously we didn't have the farm. So he said, look, you haven't got a job back in Brisbane, so come and work with me in this lending business that I've been growing. And I came back, and Dad had everything on paper. So I said, okay, I'll set it up on computer for you so it's easy to track the files and the loans. And so after 6 months, I had it all set up, and he said, well, now you've got to stay because I can't turn on a computer.
Oh, what a stitch up.
And so, I worked with him for 8 years, and Dad passed away in 2010. And look, when he passed, it was very sudden, unexpected, but, we were each other's best friend. Yeah. There was nothing unsaid between us. So I think I was lucky to have that relationship with my dad.
I think you're lucky to have those years and those years in close proximity, even though I'm sure not every day is great.
No, we grew the business quite rapidly, and we borrowed money to then on lend out to clients, and we did the classic mistake of hubris of borrowing long and lending, of probably borrowing short and lending long to some extent. And when the GFC hit, and look, I remember the date, the 12th of November 2008, Dad and I realised how much trouble we were in, because all of our clients went into arrears pretty much overnight. Everything stopped. Yeah. And they stopped paying us money, which meant we couldn't pay the banks that we'd borrowed from. And we'd spent the day running through all the numbers, and I came home and we'd just had our second daughter by then. And I remember sitting down with my wife and saying, look, I think Dad's going to go under. I think he's going to go bankrupt. He's signed more guarantees than me out of the money we'd borrowed. I said, look, I think I'll be okay, but we'll lose the business. I don't think we can keep our house, but we can take the equity we have in the house and go. Our first house was in Tarragindi, and we kind of figured we could go back to Salisbury, which was a bit cheaper. We could buy a house, and then we could both go and get jobs somewhere else and go back to work, and we'd survive. And her response was, well, we can eat mince and we can live simply. And so we knew that there was a future. Yeah. And then the next 18 months, I worked very solidly with Dad. We sold our own private investment assets and poured that money into the business so that we had cash flow. and I worked out we had 18 months worth of cash flow where I could go and sell these distressed properties. We'd lent money from, pretty much from Rocky all the way through to Adelaide. At that stage, only about 20% of the money we lent out was ours. So 20 cents in every dollar was ours and 80 cents was borrowed.
Which is scary.
Which was very scary. So that leverage, while it was profitable for us, it meant that we had to unwind
when it was good.
When it was good, yeah.
When it was good, I'm sure it was great. But, when it came knocking.
Yeah, so we had to unwind it quickly it was a matter of selling these distressed development sites.
And the market was a bit soft.
The market was soft. You had to, it was a buyer's market. You had to take
whatever you could get,
yeah,
basically.
Yeah.
And again, people know when you're on fire and you need a bucket of water thrown over you, and they go, "Well, it's this or nothing."
Yeah, and look, we got out of it, but Dad was at 68, and he just said, this is too much for me. He wanted to call in the receivers. And I said, well, everyone's guaranteed to lose their money if we call in the receivers. I said, I really believe that we can trade our way out. I've done the cash flow. I've got 18 months worth of cash flow.
Yeah.
And he said, well, what if you can't sell these properties in 18 months? And I said, well, then the market's got bigger problems than that. It means we're all stuffed.
Yeah.
And so he pretty much said, well, I'm giving you the business.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
No.
I don't want to work in it anymore.
No, I'm ready to fold it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to work through this.
Yeah. And so he said, look, if you save it, it's yours. And so I worked very hard.
So you picked up the ashes, like literally the smouldering ashes that were actually still trying to
They were still burning, and we worked hard, there were some tense moments over those 18 months, but we got everyone paid back. Everyone was paid back. They got their principal. They got their interest back. We ended up losing about 4 or 5 years worth of accrued profits in some of those loans, but we paid everyone back, and I really learnt from that. And look, Dad passed, 2 years later in 2010, but he could hold his head high. He had never gone. He didn't go broke. Everyone got their money back. And, he could be proud of what he'd achieved. So
absolutely.
But, the stress that we were both under in those 18 months was significant.
They say, mate, smooth seas don't make a good captain.
No.
Just wish those rough seas weren't so bloody rough, eh?
Got
to be nicer ways to learn these awful lessons, doesn't there? But it doesn't seem to be.
No, no. And these days I've got a much more simplified approach. I stand on the land of every loan I do, and I look every client in the eye. And it's amazing how easy that makes things, how much conflict is removed from the situation. When you meet, shake hands, you talk. I mean, it's all documented, and the solicitors are still involved. But
it's the vibe.
Yeah, it's just you get an awareness of each other. Them as a client, me as the lender, and I've got to admit it's a better way of doing business.
Yeah, well, that's it. You can look into somebody, and you can stand there and you go, "Do I see this? Like, could I make this work?"
Yeah.
Given complex circumstances, in the worst possible scenario, would this still be a good? And you go,
That's precisely it. That's
makes
exactly
a lot of sense.
That's exactly the decision.
Well, that's the thing, is you've seen it. You've gone, I know what it takes. Do they have what it takes? Do they know what it takes? Because that is, and again, for me, that's the measure as well, is I don't give a shit about what you say you can do. I watch what you do.
Actions speak far louder than words when it comes to that.
Indeed.
So that's the lending side. In terms of the politics side.
This mayhem. Now, and you explained the other day in a way that I didn't understand, like how the Senate works. And you distilled that in a way that I didn't, because I didn't really get it, but you basically summed it up as checks and balances, if I can even summarise further. But could you explain to me, so like the Senate, and again, why you've put your hand up for this?
Well, the Senate is the House of Review. So it's where well-intended legislation goes to be examined by a committee process. And you look at it and you're looking for unintended consequences of policy. And then you look at how that might be amended, so you're removing those effects on people. So it is very much the House of Review. It is actually the place for the people. So the Senate, with federation, all the states got 12 senators. Now, it does mean that you only need about 30,000 votes to be elected a senator down in Tasmania, where you need over 300,000 here in Queensland. But it is there as the House of Review. I always say to people, look, it rounds or takes the sharp edges off policy, makes it better for the people. That's the role of the Senate. So I think you need that lived experience to really come in there and examine something to say, I know we're trying to achieve this, but
have we considered X, Y, and Z from that you can reflect on from, I guess, the shared experience of the people in that role?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you do work collegiately with each other, and I think an example is at the moment there's one Senate vote between the unrealised gains on your super fund being taxed and not. And for me, I'm qualified as a financial planner, so I've done a few other things. It changes your whole investment strategy if you need to keep cash on hand to pay tax on an increase in an asset value that you haven't realised. So it means your growth is far more reduced or limited because you've got to keep more cash on hand and not invest in growth assets because you've got to pay tax on those growth assets.
Well, it circles back to what we've been talking about, it's that same risk profile getting lent out all the way that will then, I guess, stop any sort of... and I mean, is that the unintended consequence, or is that the actual plan to try and slow things down? It will. I hope it's unintended. I hope it isn't intentional. They want to slow down people's superannuation growth. Because, again, between you, me, and the fence post, I'm a bit nervous about people in their old age of our generation, because there's not enough people. There's too many at the pointy end at this point, and someone's got to pay for them, which is us and our kids. And you're there going, again, I'm not a math and economics man, but as a risk profile man, I go, bad. Yep. I can you look at it and you go, there's a big bloody cliff, and it's going to need some pretty smart thinking so that we don't just
it is
over the top.
And a lot of spending on healthcare as well as people age. Another one is something that was done by the Attorney General last year. So Australia has signed up to an anti-money laundering global initiative, which is good. I've got no problem with that.
Makes sense.
And then recently they've identified what they call tranche 2 entities. And they're now being regulated by AUSTRAC, which is the anti-money laundering cash governance side of the government.
Gotcha.
So tranche 2 entities are real estate agents and solicitors that have trust accounts.
Right.
And they now have to... so I'm governed by AUSTRAC in my own business, and I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, well, that's pretty normal. The accountants,
Well, as a person who writes...
And as a person
who lends money.
Yes.
But now so your suburban real estate agents and solicitors will have to go through the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorism Finance Act, and they'll have to have a governance system in place. And so for everyone that comes through, they'll have to look at the client and rate them as a risk profile on whether they're high or low risk for money laundering or counter-terrorism.
Hang on, so again, let me just back up here for a second. So the real estate agent, so the people, if you got your face on the bus stop, they're going to be doing hang on, am I... explain like I'm 5. Stu, am I understanding what you're saying here?
So a real estate agent who's running a business, they will have to have in place an anti-money laundering counter-terrorism program in their business, so that everyone that they interact with or on behalf of, so they're receiving deposits on a house sale, they'll have to identify where that money's come from, make an assessment on whether the person they're dealing with is at risk of money laundering or counter-terrorism funding.
Right.
They'll assess them as a politically exposed person. Now, I've just been on holidays in China with my family, and there's no directory over there of government officials. So a politically exposed person is someone who is at risk from political persecution or influence.
Yes.
So you will have to assess them on that scale. So how is a suburban accountant...
But hang on, so globally as well. So if somebody is...
Bringing money in from overseas, because we've signed up to a global initiative.
Right.
And what we're doing in introducing this layer of legislation, because on the surface it sounds absolutely great.
It makes absolute sense. No, we don't wish for people to be laundering money through stuff.
But we look at the practical implementation of it.
And you go, that's unworkable to, like, unless, of course, somebody's going to pay for all of that, because that's a specialist expertise.
It is a role in each one of those firms.
That doesn't fall under anything else that's so far outside the sphere of what that individual would do as a day job. It's going to look terrible in their walkthrough videos as well. You know, they go through, we've got this wonderful home here, and this safe is absolutely not to put your dirty money. Close that one there.
It's
like
and what it does is
that's an unintended consequence for sure.
It fails to acknowledge that these businesses are also regulated under fair trading at a state level. So I used to do audits of real estate agents' trust accounts. So they already have a large amount of compliance they have to do at a state level.
Well, absolutely. Like, broadly speaking, people aren't trying to go to jail. If you just, you're just trying to do your job, do the right thing.
And absolutely. So it's about having the checks and balances that we all expect there to be.
Yes.
But not it be so onerous and duplicating an existing level that happens at the state.
Absolutely. No, well, and again, unintended consequence is, the understatement there.
Yeah, so certainly something we need to look at, because that will just, when we talk about lower, reducing productivity in Australia, that's an example of where, for a marginal gain of reducing the risk, a marginal reduction in the risk of counter-terrorism and money laundering, we're putting a huge cost, billions of dollars, on those two industries of real estate and solicitors.
And on the back of, what end up being, because again, you go down to any community sports club and, you've got the real estate agents down there tipping money into the local joint, and like that's a lot on
them. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there was no, in the committee process where this bill was looked at and taken apart, there was no analysis of the cost until one of the LNP senators, Paul Scar, brought it up and said, have we thought about the cost for business? And they're like, oh, what do you mean? Someone's going to have to run this compliance process. It's going to have to be a staff member. And it wasn't...
So Dad said it wasn't like, we sort of got all the way through and we went, well, anti-money laundering, of course, that's great.
Yeah.
You go, well, everyone's in for that. We don't want that. Until someone went, whoa, hang on, how do you actually do the thing?
Yeah. And that wasn't included in the committee's findings, but that's an example of unintended consequences that happen with this type of legislation. So going back to that,
it's much like the unintended consequences of recording, in a real world environment and somebody running a cutting saw, which I'm sure you'll be enjoying at this point in time as you're listening in your car. There's not something wrong here. That's just Aussies at work. So I hope you enjoy the natural ambience that Stu and I are enjoying here.
And also, so in terms of going into politics, it was when Dad passed away, I was doing writing his eulogy. And I looked at all the things that he'd accomplished in life, and it was his time in public service that he was most proud of, and people recognised as it making the greatest difference. And I reflected back on, he used to challenge me all the time.
I'll bet.
Son, the problem with your generation is you're all standing on the sidelines and none of you want to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's shit. Like, and again, you've got to excuse my, but like it's hard.
It has been tough.
And you take the whole family in. Whether or not they like it, and they might not be involved, but it will permeate your existence.
It's a big impact on everyone's life. And so I made a decision then that I was working towards that as a goal. But I didn't become an accountant without studying. So I packed up the family and we headed over to Boston, and I did a Master's of Public Administration at Harvard, where we studied a range of different government policies and models. Right. We looked at what are the most effective types around the world, what's working, what's not working. It was very, very interesting.
Bloody hell. You sound very overqualified for this, mate. I haven't... I don't know, I have a lot of random conversations. I haven't met a lot of people that went, you know what, I'm going to go into public service, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to study that.
Well, I felt more comfortable in coming in with that background behind me. And then...
As you would.
I didn't run straight away. I did 10 years volunteering for the party in an unpaid role as
You're
treasurer.
a sucker for punishment, aren't you, mate? This sounds terrible.
Well,
Yep.
And so now I've got to the point now where I feel it's time. It is time to put all of that into use.
There's only so much training you can do, isn't there?
Yeah. And
Again, you've got to get off those sidelines and onto the field.
Onto the field and have a go. So that's what this is about.
Okay, well, that actually does sound dangerously prepared, and I'm not trying to be clever here. Like, that's actually a lot. That's a lot.
It's been a lot to work towards, yeah.
Because I've met, a couple of young whippersnappers that want to have a crack, and I look at them and I go, good for you, mate, but there's a bit of life experience that probably goes away in these things.
Oh, look, I campaigned alongside Ariana Doolan, who's now the youngest member in Parliament. Not the youngest ever, the youngest woman ever elected to Parliament, the member for Palmerston. I think there's a time that's right for you, and Ariana's going to be a great member for Palmerston, and she's already doing so. She's working very hard. I think for me, I needed to go through this process.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's the same process that everyone has to do. So I know I'd encourage anyone who feels
to get up and have a crack.
To get up and have a go regardless of your age.
That youthful enthusiasm is something that does get knocked out of you. So I guess you've got to make the most of that while it's there as well.
You do, absolutely.
Because the wise heads do take a.
But what you want also is a range of experiences.
Well, it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's the gift. Because would you believe, like, in some of the things that I do, like I've got people, into their 20s and then into their 80s, and the gifts that you get from each are wildly different but of equal value. Those perspectives are so incredibly helpful.
And you need that when you're solving complex problems. And the other day I was out campaigning on the roadside at Cooperoo, and I was holding one of the party's priorities, which is affordable housing. And someone came up to me and said, "Oh, you can't do that." And I said, "No, you can." They went, "Oh, no, it's impossible. You can't do affordable housing." And I said, "No, we can. What we need to do is, we need to increase supply." And so for that to happen, we need to put in place some critical infrastructure. So there's land that can't be developed because the local authorities, the councils, can't afford to run the water, the sewer, the power out there.
Yep.
So we have land that people want to develop, but the developers don't want to run all the infrastructure out there for their one development.
No.
Council can't afford to do it. So they call it trunk infrastructure. So as part of Peter Dutton's policies, he's got $5 billion there for trunk infrastructure.
Yeah, right.
Which is amazing. So it will increase supply of housing. The next thing we need to do is to stop changing the building codes in Australia. So we've as a party, we proposed a 2-year ban on changes to the Australian building code, because every time you change the code, it adds 5,000. It's a new initiative. It adds 5,000 each change to the on average to the construction of a new house. So what we're going to do is give the industry some certainty around what they can build. So it's a very simple thing. It doesn't cost the government any money. It just says, let's hold off on any changes for 2 years, and the next changes, that we might group them together as an example, and then have another 2 years, hopefully, where there's no more changes. We also need to reduce the influence of the CFMEU. It's been well discussed, particularly here in Queensland, the CFMEU tax of around 30%. We need unions. I'm not a person that says that all unions are bad, but they need to be cooperative. They need to work alongside the building industry, not against them, to deliver these more houses. So, I think unions have a key role to play, but we need good people in those unions.
Well, it's like everything, isn't it, mate? If you don't have people doing the right thing for the right reasons, inevitably the outcomes won't be for the greater good.
They won't be, definitely not. And then lastly, we need to help young people get into housing. So the greatest determinant for a happy and successful retirement is owning an own home. It actually rates higher than your superannuation balance.
Yeah, right.
And so providing the ability for young people to access their super to get a deposit for a house is really, really important, because it encourages them to put money into super. That money can be returned to super after it's done its service. But if it gets them into housing, that is critical towards your retirement. So it's the single greatest factor on your successful retirement is home ownership.
Wild. See, I actually didn't know that. But as you reflect on it, and that it does actually make a lot of sense. Like if you don't have a place to call your own, if there's always uncertainty. I've seen it with friends of mine. I've got friends who are recently engaged and they've moved house 3 times in the last 2 years. You know, one of the places had mould and the bloody thing, nobody would deal with it, and they just and jack it up. But like you just watch it and you go, that's a
it costs
full-blown train wreck.
Reduces your productivity.
Oh my God! Yeah. And you know, you're calling in the army of friends to help move because you know you don't have the
I grew up with a ute when I was first got my licence, so I'm well experienced on many house moves.
Yeah, mate, I got a ute. I tell you what, yeah, it's amazing how much those things can end up going out. And I guess these are I don't know, like the things that I guess I just want to, like, I'm interested in all points of view. I'm not particularly fussed on, you know, anything in particular other than, you know, I think it's a duty to leave the place a little bit better than you found it.
Yeah.
Like I think that's, and particularly when you bring little humans into this world and you go, you know, am I helping it point a little bit better, or am I not? Am I part of the problem by sitting on the sidelines? Well, I just really respect what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Because you know, I don't think I got in me what it takes to do these sorts of things, and it is interesting speaking to people to better understand, like what calls them to service and what calls people to make a difference. And it's interesting because, you know, I've accidentally fallen into, I guess more voluntary roles in the last few years where it's just the small business owner in me. And, you know, at home I'll be like, for fuck's sake, like it's just not that fucking hard. Like I'll just do it. I'll just get it done. Because I know that I can just walk in there, fix it and go, there you go, have it back. And I see that where, much the same as you were saying with the senior partners, the senior auditors, they can walk in and go, yep, I can see exactly what's the problem and I know exactly how to fix it.
Yeah.
There's no testing here. Do this, get that. And, I guess I just really admire people that want to bring that, because your life would be far more simple if you just didn't.
It would be easier. It's easier to sit on the sidelines. That's why we all do it, and maybe that's why it's taken me so long to get here. But it comes a point where that sense of frustration, which you've spoken about, becomes overwhelming, and particularly when you know that, we can do better. Like we can have a much better future. We can provide a better future for our children. We can be. I think government can do a better job than it's doing, and that's the frustration. And we don't need to tax people more to do it. We've got all the resources. We've got smart people. We just need to get out of our own way sometimes.
And doesn't that feel like it? I mean, I'm fortunate that I'm pretty well travelled. My motorsport has taken me to all corners of the earth, and I've seen so much, and I've seen so many things where I go, holy shit, it's good here. And every time I come home from any part of the world, I just, you breathe a sigh of relief and you go, we live in the most extraordinary place. And I can't understand why, but we seem to have forgotten that, like, it's incredible here.
Yeah, we don't celebrate what Australia is.
No.
And that's a real shame, and that's why I guess I want to return to that positivity and that hope that we shouldn't be ashamed of what we are and where we've come from. That there's been tough times,
absolutely.
On all sides, and particularly for Indigenous Australians, incredibly tough times,
mate,
and we need to recognise that, but also we need to look forward to the future with incredible hope of what we can achieve. We need some hope,
because I speak to I've got cousins who are in their early 20s, and they are somewhere near without hope. Like they are without hope. They just go, what am I going to do? Like,
can't afford a house.
Can't do anything. Like, just stuck. Like, just permanently stuck in a place of, you can't see a better future. And I mean, I think that's about as shitty as it could get.
I think it's a bad place to leave people.
Terrible place.
And I think we've all got a responsibility to lift them out of that by giving them opportunity, and then letting them go forward.
And saying that there is hope. Like, at least, we're relatively similar in age. We were told, go and do this and do that, and then you can do this and then you can do that. And, you just, one foot would follow the other, broadly speaking, and you could, get a job, do some study. It wasn't that far removed from the generation before. But there has been some sort of wild disconnect over the last, 2 decades.
I think we've been conditioned to be a nation of victims. And that's not the Australian way. That's only more recently. We as I said, we were a people that got on and solved our own problems.
Battlers,
absolutely.
Was how we reflected on ourselves. And, the pride of the Anzacs, like the people who... And I've stood in those places. I have stood in the foxholes. I have sat there and I have imagined a 17/18-year-old, you're a fucking child, with a rifle in their hand, having to fight, and I just can't fathom the horror of what people had to do in this last 100 years for us to be so comfortable we've forgotten how beautiful it is.
And how hard they worked for us to be here. Like we are standing on the shoulders of the generations that have gone before us, and I think we're almost disrespecting their sacrifices.
Terribly so.
Because we are missing these opportunities to go, to grow this country.
To double down. Well, they all sacrificed, like all of our parents. And I have these conversations with my mum and dad, with my wife's parents, and, people tell them they're lucky. Geez, if you want to wind up my mother-in-law, you just drop the word boomer in and go, oh, you're so lucky, old boomer. And she's like, mate, we used to recycle Glad wrap.
Yeah. I remember...
wash it and use it again.
I remember, we'd be going out around the farm and we had an old Land Cruiser ute and the kids would be standing at the back hanging onto the board and mum and dad would be in the front and they'd see a dead sheep and mum and dad would pull up and we'd all jump off the back and mum and dad would go and skin that sheep so that we could preserve and sell the skin.
Absolutely.
Things that people wouldn't even consider doing these days, we did because that skin was worth $25 or $30.
Absolutely. And so you double down and you do that. Much like your man with the bag of potatoes.
Yeah.
Like there was a post-war mentality, and look, it is a mild problem these days, where my mum and dad wouldn't throw anything out.
Yes,
like they kept everything, every piece of material, every piece of metal, every piece of timber. If you could make that nail straight again, Scott, you use that bloody nail.
Yeah, you had a scrap pile.
You keep everything, which I've got to tell you, when preparing for the cyclone was absolutely shit house at my mum and dad's place because they have fucking everything from the last 50 years. But like that mentality where there was nothing, came home from the war, big chunk of the population gone and you got to build from scratch. Yeah. And we just went, righto, shit, get it done.
Yeah.
And the gifts that our generations have been given is that we grow up in a place that is safe and, not perfect, but broadly speaking, it is kind, it is, everything functions as we imagined democracy might. And I still enjoy that quote that democracy's, it's not great, but it's the best we've come up with.
No, I think it was Churchill who said, it's
isn't that his?
Is the worst form of government devised, but it's better than all the others.
And that's it. I've butchered it, but thank you for your excellence. We acknowledge it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And our children don't have to worry about. I look at some of the stuff that happens in the States, when your kids go to school and they're just some of the things where things have got so far out of control that you're really not sure how you're going to wind things back. Whereas here, because it is so wonderful and so special and so good, there's nothing, you can be upset about everything because the battles that these generations have fought where they have had to scrimp, save, recycle, make do, that has had an unintended consequence.
I think, and we're just not developing we need strong leadership. I know I go back, and it's well documented, but John Howard with the gun control.
Mate, and just quietly, I bloody love guns. I'm actually a pretty handy shot. But I am so happy that it's extremely difficult to own one.
Oh, I'm totally with
I'm
you.
delighted.
I'm glad it's. I'm a licensed firearm owner as well.
I bloody love it. I'm real handy.
Yep, but the requirements to store it safely,
absolutely.
Registered, it's checked.
Yep.
That's what keeps our community safe.
Absolutely.
And I would not like to. I have lived in America, but I would not like that culture to be here.
Because I was in cadets. I had that opportunity when I was at school. And 7.62 millimeter SLR, like I can field strip one of those with my eyes closed. And everything you were taught was respect. This is something this is not to be trifled with. And I never forget those lessons, and I'm glad to have had those. And I enjoy it as a sport. Like I think it's, it's particularly pistols, like handgun and that sort of stuff. Like that is extraordinarily difficult. To be good and to work with speed and accuracy is phenomenal. But getting rid of that and just going, no way. Because if we hadn't had made what was, an unpopular or complex or difficult or whatever, I can't remember well enough, I'm just so bloody glad that happened.
It was a brave political decision.
Made bold.
Very bold, but it has certainly made our community safer.
And that has paid dividends.
It has.
And that's the thing, is that level where you go, nah, absolutely not. We will not go that way. Like, I tip my hat, and we all owe a debt of gratitude when we see where that path has gone, because I've watched that and go, the day that you're okay to let slide that children in a kindergarten are going to get gunned down and that's the cost of doing business, I'm like, yikes. That's a pretty big backpedal from that place.
And this is the leadership where I don't think we see a lot of these days. And I think, to get political, and this is why I'm running, I think Australians have seen it from Peter Dutton. To bring up nuclear. Nuclear was a taboo subject as an energy source in Australia. For Peter to bring it up for this election, to bring it up a long time out so people could be informed and get an understanding of it, I think we could look back the way we look back at the Snowy River scheme, we look back at the gun buyback scheme, as a time that changed Australia because we had strong leadership that went to the people. GST is another. We went to the people and we put forward positive changes that will give us, baseload power. Everyone loves renewables. We want as much renewables as our system can have before it becomes unstable. And the instability is what's driving the price peaks that we're all suffering from.
Absolutely. Somebody explained to me, because I was trying to understand it, and the concept of peak load, which I understand from a systems management. But when you are operating up near the top, you've got to have wiggle room. As actually, I might say you could dial it up to 11.
Spinal tap side.
Yeah, absolutely. But if that's not there, and if you are basically just redlining the thing all the time, all you need is, everybody to turn on their AC all at once and see you later.
And that's the problem, is we're removing capacity, that baseload capacity, and we're replacing it with, a source which is, while it has a marginal cost, is quite cheap to produce power. The transmission lines and the structural setup is expensive, and then if you need another surge supplier to cover that shortfall, all of a sudden it starts to get quite expensive. And that's where we need to have a policy, a commitment going forward, where we have nuclear as baseload, we have gas as baseload, and then we have renewables there as well.
And then that basically gets you to a point where you go, righto, the system can run now. We have future-proofed it to X amount. We know that we can run it up to here for this much population growth for this many decades. And we're not living on the bleeding edge. So, and wasn't this a big thing in, obviously, US politics has been spicy for the last while. But Texas, their grid keeps falling over. Like when it got hot or cold, or just the whole thing would fall over. And you sort of see that, what do they say? Failing to plan is planning to fail. Yeah. And it's very much that. And I did have to laugh when I saw somebody, we've had, not great things happen up north, and, there's power out. And the military are flying in big diesel generators. And there was a quip that nobody's flying in solar panels when the power goes out. And it's, that's being a smart ass, but it's just, you've got to have this stuff running. Everything else falls off the back. Is if it's not operational, like, you got real problems.
You need reliable power, and you need that for a manufacturing industry.
Absolutely.
Because manufacturing are the ones that get hit with that peak pricing.
Absolutely, yes.
Because as a consumer, we don't see the full effects of redlining the power grid. That is passed on to commercial, and you go into your coffee shop these days, and your local coffee guy's been hit by power prices because obviously he's heating and cooling, or she heating and cooling. They now have a very complex definition of what is a casual employee, and the coffee beans have gone up, because of natural environment and some unpredictable events. So they're struggling. They're really struggling. Now we can't affect the price of coffee as a global commodity, but we can affect the price of their power. And we can give them a simple definition of what a casual employee is, so that both their and their employee are aware and informed of what that means.
And again, this is the whole thing, is that you're not, there'll always be outliers, but broadly speaking, people want to do the right thing. They want to do the right thing by their staff, because effectively, without their staff, they don't have a business.
Yep.
And people I know who employ go over and above for their staff. And do the right thing and help them and give them time to go and do all the things that they need to do, and flexible family arrangements and all the nice stuff. Like, you're not out there trying to cause grief for people. Like, that's not the first thought in your mind, is how can I take the piss as hard as I can?
Well, you're working closely. In a small and family business, you are working right alongside your staff, and you're a team. So, you're invested in them.
Absolutely. Their life and your life become intertwined in a way that is hard to explain if you haven't actually done it.
Yeah. And I've run a small business for 23 years, and I know
the last
exactly
thing you
what
want to
that
do is do the wrong thing by your staff.
Yeah.
Like, that's the dumbest thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
So why would you, for the people who do the wrong thing, they need to be reprimanded. But for people just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Because it just makes it uncompetitive, which is why everyone just looks elsewhere.
Definitely.
Stu, and see, this is why I enjoy meandering conversation. But look, I am aware that I've taken up a pretty solid chunk of your day today, and you do have actual work to do. My day's fine, mate. This is what I love to do. Stu, for anybody that wants to talk to you about finance, politics, any of the things, how could people reach out? How could they get in touch with you?
The simplest way is through the LNP website. So we have our federal team listed out there, and I'm down the bottom as one of the Senate candidates. So you can click through to my page. You can read a little bit more about my history, and there are links to my Facebook and Instagram there.
There you go.
You can.
I was going to say, it's a bit bloody fancy. Okay, in the national there.
Yeah, and then you can volunteer, you can donate, you can get in touch with me.
All the things.
More than happy for people to get in touch with me and ask any questions or any concerns they might have. I'm more than happy to listen.
Stu, I can't thank you enough for making this time, because, again, this is what I think is missing. I think that this is missing, is getting to know people. Like, I don't want to get to know people from, like, one-line bangers of trying to throw mud at each other. Like, you want to understand the person. Like, the whole idea of all these things is that you speak for people, and if they go, I like the cut of his jib, they go, that's the fella I'd like to... And I just, I appreciate you taking the time, because I think that it's important.
Oh, thank you very much for letting me tell my story.
Well, we'll put all of Stu's details in the show notes there, so you can look in and follow him up. But for those of you listening, thanks for joining us, and as I always say, be kind to yourselves. Thank you, Stu.
Thank you.